Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest installment of Liticast. Thanks so much for joining us. We've actually been off the air for a week or so, and I'm very excited to come back with our guest today because it's a topic that comes up quite a bit with our clients and our prospects. And I think that there's definitely a void that Jeremy and his team are actually filling. So love to introduce everyone to Jeremy Pook. He's the founder of Senior Attorney Match. He basically designs and implements succession plans for your law firm. So working with senior attorneys across the country, understanding really what they're doing, what their plans look like, and helping them. I love this quote. I'm just going to read it. If you have clients and referral sources, your practice presents value to the right successor. So that's a great way to summarize what you do. So Jeremy, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Terry, thanks so much. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, as am I. And I'm saying this from a place of interest because this is something that myself and my team, like I mentioned, it comes up quite a bit. Like how are firms dealing with this? And it's a topic that actually touches a bunch of different areas of the business. The type of law that's being practiced, what the current success rates are. How are you thinking about what the firm looks like in 5 years? People are obviously, maybe reaching age of retirement, and what exactly they do. So I'll shut up. I'll let you describe what you do and give us a little more color on what you do for people.
Well, great, Terry. Thank you again so much. So Senior Attorney Match, like you said, we design and implement succession plans for senior attorneys. So senior attorneys are attorneys that have practiced 30 years or more. And when clients contact us, and we work with lawyers all over the country, of course, their first question is, what's my practice worth? And who could actually buy it? So I thought that would probably be a good place for us to start, Terry, because I tend to think that's on a lot of lawyers' minds, people that have practiced, lawyers that have practiced for really a generation. Some of them think they have no value at all. Because they're the ones that clients contact, and maybe there's no value to it at all. So we wanted to share with the audience. We have a slide that we can go through in terms of the method that Senior Attorney Match has developed to value law firms. So on the screen that I see, we'll be moving from left to right, because what we've developed over the years in meeting with many senior attorneys, Terry, is that, and that quote that you gave before of, okay, if you have clients and referral sources, then you have value for the right successor. So you can see here, the components to value are really fourfold for pretty much any attorney. That is, what does your client list consist of? Who are your referral sources that send you clients? What's the goodwill that you and your practice have developed in your community, in your state, in your region? And as we know, and some Litify clients have national practices, sometimes even international. And then the last one is the subject matter knowledge. Most attorneys that we work with have a particular expertise in one or more areas that can really add value to, again, this right successor. So you take these four values, almost like four ingredients, and you can see where the arrows point towards, Terry, is future retained billings. And I'll give some sort of bad news first, Terry, but there's really good news when you're looking to the right of after future retained billings. It's very hard to put an actual dollar value on the value of a law practice because of the goodwill component to a given attorney and the attorney's practice. So really what a buyer is succeeding to is what those future retained billings, what are those four ingredients, the four components, the client list, referral source list, goodwill, subject matter, knowledge, how will that turn into future billings, future revenues based upon the senior attorney's practice? And they can go in really one of three directions. We very much promote that senior attorneys join growing law firms. And we'll talk about that more throughout the hour. The next one is an internal plan. And that's really the one that most senior attorneys want to do. They would love nothing more than for their associates, their junior partners to take over the practice. That's another option. And then the third option is just maintain the status quo. Okay, you're practicing right now, and whether you're 62 or 72, you could continue practicing, maintain that status quo. As you see, though, we do put a risk factor on that. But just in summation, how do you value a law practice? That first question we ask clients are, okay, tell us about your client list. Tell us who the referral sources are. What's the goodwill you've developed, and what is it that you really specialize in? So we can take off the slide and love to talk more.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. I was remiss in when we started this up. So thanks to the audience who's joining us via our own website, via YouTube, via LinkedIn. Thank you. And please, ask questions. I already see some stuff coming in, which we'll get to in the comments section, but please ask questions or make comments as you have them. So excellent. So, one of the things that we see is, there's a change that's associated with this, obviously. Do you see that firms, do they underestimate, overestimate? Like, are they afraid of this change? Like, I would imagine that people put these decisions off or put sort of this planning off as long as they can. And then I'm almost fearful that, they get in a position where they have to do something versus being proactive about it. Do you see that? Like, how do you try to advise against that?
All the time. My grandfather had this great, phrase, and, it's not his own, but I'd hear it, he'd say it to me a lot, which is, you bang your head against the wall, Terry, and you're only going to get a headache. And I mention it because I speak to so many senior attorneys and explain to them the value that they have and the risk that status quo presents to them. Because another phrase that we share with our clients is that, and this goes to what you're asking, is that if today's like yesterday and tomorrow is going to be like today, well, why make change? Okay. And so many attorneys, they do stay in that status quo. And I think, Terry, I was going to ask you to share this slide a little later, but I think it really begs it to call up this other slide right now, because we have to recognize, of course, we're in the latter half of 2020, and boy, has this been a messed up and really difficult and challenging year. But as you and I were talking about earlier, before we went on live, that the reckoning that has happened, and it has hit law, in that in the status quo, what we find, Terry, is that the typical senior attorney-led firm is going to generate less clients over time. Because in reality, when we talked about the value of clients and referral sources, right? Clients will retire. Clients will pass away. Clients will move away. Same with referral sources. So your senior attorney that's thinking that, okay, today's like yesterday, that doesn't always happen. And your competitors, the younger growing law firms, I mean, it's almost overwhelming in some respects, but in your world, Terry, this is the norm, right? Of law firms recognizing you don't just have a website today. You're on LinkedIn, you're on Facebook, YouTube, you're tweeting on Twitter, you're entering into Instagram. We didn't even put on TikTok, but lawyers are going to enter that arena too. They're not just going to be dancing, Terry. Okay. They're going, and this is how, and this is where new business, I'm often saying to clients that, do you know who is the biggest referral source today and is going to be the biggest referral source for lawyers tomorrow? It's a 2-syllable word. It's Google. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if you're not there, then you're going to continue to lose market share. So we'll probably come back to this one. I want to answer your question, which is, the lawyers that will stay in status quo, they run this risk that a key associate or junior partner that they thought would take over the practice could someday, we call this a random Tuesday event. On a random Tuesday, could say, you know what? You're 67 right now and you're writing my check, for payroll every 2 weeks. I don't know if you're going to be here at age 70, but I just got called by a recruiter and they made me a great offer and I'm going over to that other firm. And it happens, Terry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We see it quite a bit. And candidly, because I run the sales organization as part of what I do for Litify, and I'll be candid, we'll go into a firm, and if there is zero plan for succession, not even thinking about it, and maybe not even a recognition along the lines of that slide we just showed, that those things are crucial to the life of the firm, I often tell my salespeople just to skip it. Don't even, because you're going to spend too much time educating this firm who, the 5 most dangerous words in business. We've always done it this way. And when we really sniff that out in the beginning of a process, and even if you do have, what I call sort of like the groundswell, meaning you have users or even middle management or associates who are looking at it and saying, we got to change from a platform perspective, how we kind of run, how we work, how we leverage our data, how we leverage marketing sources, how we collaborate. Like, we got to do a better job along these ways. If you don't have senior management that's in place that's at least open to these conversations, I find it's not even worth our time to really engage. So we find those firms that have this in mind. Or, and then before we joined the broadcast here, where you and I had the same exact line, where it's, people are waking up and finding they can do more on their phone with their kids than they can do with, their own firm. So if they're waking up and they actually want to make that actionable, and they want to say, okay, I'm going to address the technology in my firm and make it actionable, great. Those are the firms we love to talk to, because we have a ton of expertise and a ton of material, even coming out of Liticast like this, where we say, hey, think about it in this context. And we're not necessarily selling them Litify out of the gates, but just sort of educating in a sense, okay, this is the new reality that you're faced with. And COVID in many ways was that sort of forced reckoning we talk about, where it gets thrust upon everybody. And how you react now is going to be really that's going to determine the legacy of your firm.
Right.
Should you sell it? Should you do something else with it? But if you don't understand that, then you're putting yourself at a disservice.
Yep, I agree with you completely. And I can sort of put myself in the shoes of, let's say, a viewer right now who is a senior attorney and can sort of feel guilty and be like, we have always done it this way. We should contact a Litify. We maybe should contact, Jeremy. And I'd encourage them, please contact Litify. But I will tell you that the stock of that goodwill of a senior attorney, if they would consider joining a growing law firm, that the growing law firm are the ones that your salespeople are hitching onto, and they're hitching onto you. As they're bringing in those new cases, they need the 30-year vet, that can crank out high quality work. And we both do a lot of work in the trial attorney space. Mm-hmm. And what I'm seeing a lot among trial attorneys is the sophisticated trial attorney firms, they are bringing in a lot of inventory, and even during COVID. And then the question comes up, wow, how are we actually going to get this work done? And by recruiting in a senior attorney that can actually do the work, knows the defense attorneys, they know the judges, they know that subject matter that we talked about a few minutes ago, that is a tremendous match that can be made, because you hear different stories from different clients. And one of my favorite clients told me that, and now he's at a growing firm and is very happy. He told me, Jeremy, look, I would be Dr. Phil in the morning and Oprah in the afternoon, right? Meaning that he would just deal with all the different personnel issues among what was going on in his firm. His day, Terry, wouldn't start till 5 in the afternoon to actually do law work. Right. And then I talked to him a few months after he joined a firm, and I asked him, how are you doing? And he's like, this is amazing. I'm just practicing law. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Empowering people to do what they do best is a lot of what this really boils down to. So, Jeremy, you mentioned something in passing there, but when you have senior attorneys that go into growing law firms, give us a little more on that. Meaning, how do they find placement there? How do they assess the best move for themselves? I'm sure you give guidance on this all the time, but I'd love to hear a little bit more on that.
Sure, thank you. So going back to what Senior Attorney Match does, where we design and we implement plans. So on the design side, we do 2 parts to design. One is a next step workshop. That's 90 minutes. We meet one-on-one with our clients. We do it over Zoom, and we use a virtual whiteboard just to fill out, what's their roadmap, what's their timeline, what are their goals, okay? In our next step process, which follows that, then we really do a deep dive in terms of what it is that in that value slide that we went over before, in terms of the clients and the referral sources and their subject matter knowledge, really become experts in our clients. So by example, we did that with a client a couple of years ago. We looked over their case lists because they're trial attorneys. We saw that there are New York attorneys that focus on labor law cases, okay? Just kept seeing labor law, labor law, labor law. So that allowed me to learn a heck of a lot about the labor laws in New York. And then we determined what we should really be looking for, of course. And this is really the, I won't call it the secret sauce of Senior Attorney Match, but it certainly is a big part of our process, is we want to help growing firms and senior attorneys join firms that's already in their vertical. Right. So we were only in that situation, we were only identifying or primarily identifying New York PI firms with real specialties in labor law. Okay. And so by identifying those firms, we were able to contact those firms and say, hey, look, we've got 30-year vets here. They've got X number of labor law cases. You have Y experience in labor law. Do you think this could work? And of course, we got callbacks because they're saying, yeah, we would love, and we use this phrase a lot, Terry, of grow by acquisition. This was a way for the growing firm to effectively grow by acquisition for our client. And that was the client, by the way, that was Oprah in the morning and Dr. Phil in the afternoon, right? Mm-hmm. So it gave our client the ability to avoid that. Now, you raise a different question, which is something where senior attorney match, right? I figured that when the match happened, my job was done. Leave people at the altar, and you're off to the races. What I found, though, is that there's always a significant culture shock. Okay, I compare it to changing high schools, and in some respects, as I've been sort of thinking this metaphor through, senior attorneys, they're like the class president of their class for like the last 30 years. Right? I mean, it's been done, like you said before. What were those five words, Terry, that you brought up?
We've always done it this way.
Right. They've always done it their way for like 30 years, right? So when they join a growing law firm, we've introduced now integration consulting because it's important. Okay, because you've been class president of this class for so many years. Now you're joining a totally different high school. The fun thing is there's a lot of younger people there, and you picked up your phone before, and people that interact with kids and grandkids and whatnot. It's actually a huge jolt of energy. That was something I always thought, but didn't fully comprehend how exciting and invigorating it is for the 60-something to be working next to the 30 and 40-something. Huge jolt of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that is the case. As we're talking here, Jeremy, I'm drawing the analogy between our businesses because change management or integration management, as you just said, is a big part of what we do too, because we can put the most, kick-ass technology solution in front of a firm or in front of, senior managers. But unless you really have that sort of education and assistance, it could be like handing someone the keys to the space shuttle and not giving them a manual. And yeah, it looks great and it probably could fly, but how do we do this whole thing? So there's a lot of ongoing sort of guidance that you have to give to some of these firms.
100%. And you see me smirking because we don't know each other all that well, but I reference my maternal grandfather a lot, and he got me my best summer jobs, and I worked in a shoe warehouse for a couple of summers, just unloading boxes of shoes, women's shoes, right? And my first day of work, and I think this ties into what you just said, and it's part of what integration consulting is, that I was given a really tough first job. They're like, give this one to the FNG, right? And I think you know what FNG is,
right?
I've been
the FNG many times.
Yes, new guy is where NG is. I think we'll let the audience figure out what the F is. But really, that is what happens because it's on both sides of the equation. You start up in a new practice, and both of them are FNGs, and we really have to integrate them in and show them that instruction book, because otherwise they can get stuck in the mud. And when they don't get stuck in the mud, a lot of really great magic can happen.
Sure. So just I had one question written down over here that I definitely wanted before we leave the topic. When you have senior attorneys, looking to sell their firm or do something like, what are some of the mistakes that they make when they're doing that, and maybe our audience can learn from the void?
Yeah, sure. So we already touched on the biggest one, right? Which is status quo, which is just waiting too long, and we all see it. I mean, we all have, the baby boomer generation is with us, and they're going through this right now, and so many entrepreneurial baby boomers. So any lawyer, they know a friend, or an acquaintance or a college, someone that they went to college with that just waited too long to sell their business. Mm-hmm. So even though, like we said before, we don't put an actual dollar value on law practices, at least coming up with a plan that can monetize your practice. It's unfortunate, Terry. I mean, I have worked with estates of lawyers, and the value, because so much of the value is based on the goodwill of the lawyer, whether it's an estate or, God forbid, a lawyer suffers a physical or mental disability, the value just plummets, pennies on the dollar. So the biggest mistake is status quo. The second one, and we did a podcast on this a few months ago, we call it the 5 myths versus realities of succession planning for lawyers. So I won't go over all 5, but a big part of those myths are that your internal successors or your presumed internal successors, do they really want to take over your practice? That's a huge one. Okay.
Mhm.
Because what I see so often, at least in smaller firms, is that you had your rainmaker, who's now your senior attorney. I call him or her a papa bear or a mama bear, right? They've always brought in the porridge, right?
Yeah.
So they brought in all this work. They still bring in the work. They give the work to the younger attorneys who are great attorneys, and then they just expect that on like January 1st of 2021, 2022, or heck, 1999, okay, that they would have walked in the door and say, I want to buy your practice. I want to take it over. And a huge mistake is to avoid that conversation because they're often afraid, right? They're afraid that if they walk down the hallway and to, junior partner Dave and say, hey, Dave, I think we should really talk about succession planning here.
Mhm.
They're really afraid that Dave's going to bolt. Dave's going to be like, oh my God, he's retiring. I better get another job. But you know what the reality is that Dave doesn't have his own book of business. Dave depends on the senior attorney to write the checks for salary. So Dave is going to sit down and have that conversation. And it's bound to be an honest conversation of either Dave wants to buy the practice, okay, or Dave will say, you know what, this is not my bag. I love working here. I'm meant to be an employee. And a huge mistake is waiting too long. And I'll just say one last one, which is assuming that your friendly competitor, who's often your same age, okay, is the one that can take over your practice because you see that person in court or you saw them at some some CLE event or something like that, and you just you're talking and that person says, hey, when you're ready, we're always here for you. And then they just get it stuck in their mind. Oh, Bill can take over my practice when I'm ready. And then when you actually ever talk to Bill will say, no, I'm not so sure I want to do that. So those are three big mistakes that a lot of lawyers unfortunately do. I guess commit's a strong word, but I'll say more like fall into.
Right. Going back to one, or maybe number one and two that you talked about, and I think that there's this concept of transparency and visibility into things, and clearly on the Litify side, it's more around case inventory and task management and documents and things like that. But I think it's sort of a seismic shift that's happening in society, meaning the more we always come down to kind of knowledge is power. But the more you know and the more transparent you can be with your staff, with each other, with your clients, that rising tide lifts a lot of boats. And I had never really thought about it in the context that you just raised it. But that's incredibly insightful because it almost becomes part of that change that you're making as a firm. And I would actually argue that it's a great way to kind of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but sort of clean house. Because if you have people that are not thinking about the longevity of the firm, not thinking about some type of succession, not thinking about, maybe I am just an employee and that's okay for now, but 5 years from now, I have no intention of buying this firm or taking, like, that's better to be known now than certainly, when your back's against the wall, so to speak. So this whole concept, we talk about this a lot at Litify, of transparency and really understanding where people's intentions lie. And, you could be kind of draconian about it in terms of who's working, who's not, who's invested in the business at a very tactical level. But I think what you're talking about is very strategic. Like, really, where does this go from here? And if you have that sort of upfront thing, you're better off, clearly.
100%. And that's really why we created, going back to this design and implement, because I started out only doing implementation. People would call me and say, okay, you're a great senior attorney. Let's just bring you to market right away.
Right.
And search for other firms. And we recognized that, no, we need to create this workshop, that 90-minute workshop, so that they can, in confidence, share the concerns that they have. Why, going back to that, that Dave character, why are they afraid to have that transparent conversation with Dave? Because you know what? Like, Dave's going home to his wife at night and being like, we just celebrated his 68th birthday. That is the senior attorney. And his wife is saying, Dave, he's not going to live forever. But having that transparency is huge, because what I find often is that the Dave in this example, the one that was getting the porridge from the senior attorney, often really, it was not meant to run a business. They freak out over making rent and being put on a credit line and paying payroll. But on the other hand, and literally earlier today, I spoke with a managing partner of a trial attorney firm here in New England, and I said, I've got this great senior attorney, and he's got a 25-year, partner in name only. Would you take on that person too? Because they're like family, Terry, right? And that managing partner, like, of course, we don't have to train this person. This person knows how to actually try a case. I mean, that's when you compare a senior attorney with often 20-year vets that are with them as compared to someone coming out of law school or someone coming out of a first or a second job, and how much time you've got to train them. It's a huge win for the growing law firms to take on those senior attorneys and their associates too.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out that in the comments section here, Ari Kornhaber, who's a great partner of Litified Esquire Bank, he's saying from a lender's perspective, it's extremely helpful when the law firm has a plan. If they have a plan in place or there's some type of contemplation around that, and that's a huge piece. And there's a lot of strings that attach to that, Jeremy, as you know, and clearly from a Litified perspective, we talk a lot from a systems and understanding what's working and what's not, and process and things like that. I'm curious. One thing we haven't really talked a lot about, and I'm curious how you address this in your dealings with these firms. How do you make sure that the clients receive the same level of service? Because ultimately, if someone's reputation's on the line, someone's delivering a good product, as it were, to their clients, that goes away, then there's a lot of trouble out there. So how do you kind of, I don't want to say guarantee, but how do you really be mindful of that, and how do you kind of checkpoint that process to make sure that clients are still getting what they need?
Yeah, sure. So two-part answer there. So one is that in the implementation phase of what Senior Attorney Match does. So let's go back to those attorneys that did the labor law cases. Okay, we, similar to selling a business, we do a tremendous amount of due diligence that goes on both sides of the coin, right? The buyer is doing due diligence on the seller is doing due diligence on the buyer. So you have multiple meetings, and you really find out. And I'll say that firm culture is king or queen. Okay, that is, we find out in advance of even two firms merging with each other, a senior attorney joining a growing law firm, that can you work with these people? Now, you haven't actually rolled up your sleeves and had meetings with clients and whatnot, but we've all developed ourselves over time and can learn about, is this the kind of person or people that we can work with? So we hope during the due diligence phase that we check the box that these are competent lawyers. These are good people. These are people that will get along with my clients. Let's say we check all those boxes, right? And then 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, a year later, now we're introducing the clients, because you put your finger on it, Terry, right? Which is the goodwill, right? The senior attorney has developed all this great goodwill. There, I bring up a syllogism. Okay, I was lousy at math, Terry. Okay, but it dawned on me of remembering, like, I don't know, whenever I was crappy in like 9th grade geometry or whatnot, right? That if A equals B and B equals C, right, then A equals C. All right. So how does that factor here? That is that the client trusts the senior attorney. Okay, the senior attorney trusts the let's call him new guy. Now we've erased the F after a few months. Okay, so senior attorney trusts the new guy. When the senior attorney introduces his client to the new guy automatically trusts the new guy, because he's getting the proverbial blessing, of the senior attorney. It works almost all the time. Okay, because again, we're leveraging the goodwill of the senior attorney and the clients. You brought this up before, and I didn't really expand on it when you asked about the mistakes to avoid. Clients are asking their attorneys, "Hey, when are you thinking about retiring?" And so when I have 65, so we've talked a lot about trial attorneys, but we do a lot of work in other areas. I know Litify does work in other areas of the law. So let's just, pick on for a moment or really identify trust and estates attorneys, right? Senior attorneys that are in trust and estates, in reality, Terry, they have written thousands of wills. They will retire or really probably pass away before a lot of those wills and trusts are administered. When the 60 or early 70-something senior attorney can walk in the room with the 40-something and meet with the family to pass that baton on, huge transfer of the goodwill.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a powerful, sort of story, as it were, to tell coming in and saying that this is sort of the successor, live and in person. You touched a little bit on this, and maybe it is sort of the same thing, but maybe just give me a little more on brand. You and I were talking before the show, like how many of Litify clients, in fact, have amazing brands, and they're very mindful of it, and they're very deliberate about putting their brand out there. And I know you don't necessarily put a dollar value on that, but how do you kind of keep that lifted up, and how do you talk through that process with during a transition or even afterwards, or sort of like whatever the word is, sort of brand,
Sure. I'm glad you brought it. I'm really glad you brought it. If we can call up that value slide again, because that will help us to address that. And before it comes up, I'll mention to you that I see where we are at this point in time with Senior Attorney Match, that we are in what I'll call Senior Attorney Match 1.0, because so many senior attorneys, the brand is really their goodwill. Okay, it's the goodwill. Let's go back to that trust and estates attorney, right? So the trust and estates attorney who has developed a specialty because he or she knows the estate tax really well on both the federal side and the state side, assuming that there's an estate tax in that state. So that goodwill is in some respects the brand of that given attorney. And in Senior Attorney Match 1.0, Terry, I work very often with attorneys that it's really their personal brand. Okay, it's not really the brand of the firm, which is dissimilar from Senior Attorney Match, but I'm catching up. I'm catching up. Law firms are catching up because the 21st century, and we've talked about this before, that here we are. And thank you. This really spells it out very well visually. Okay, so I was saying before that the 1.0, the typical senior attorneys that Senior Attorney Match is working with, these are ones that will have sort of the website only, and it's their personal brand. The growing law firms, the firms of 2020 and beyond, okay, that are building up on all different kinds of digital platforms, they're developing brands that the brand itself will have its own separate value. I'm not seeing much of that right now with lawyers that, let's say, have been practicing for 30 plus years, but we're certainly seeing it. And we'll just name one because, heck, anybody that drives on a highway almost anywhere in the United States today, let alone watches any kind of TV, is familiar with Morgan & Morgan, okay? And that's an example of a very well-branded law firm. And I think they're trailblazers for what's to come. And I certainly encourage younger firms that are working with Litify, that yes, they should be focusing on brand, because clients are going to gravitate towards brand much more than clients of yesteryear.
Yeah, we had and Morgan, we're very proud of our relationship with them. They're our biggest client and one of our early clients. And I would agree that they are really, sort of the trailblazers in that front. We had actually Ed Herman from Brown and Crouppen on a few weeks back, and Ed's another great, sort of advocate of brand and really just sort of being a lot of what Ed and his team do is almost unrelated to the where their practice actually is, but it's more just about letting folks know that they're there, that they're reliable, that they're thinking about their business, that if someone reaches out to them, maybe inappropriately, maybe for a practice area that they don't do or in a geography they don't cover, but just sort of maintaining that relationship and having sort of that brand recognition for them. So if that person ever comes back around or someone that's affiliated with that person, you have that immediate sort of leg up, so to speak, when engaging with that client. So I would agree with that.
Sure. And by the way, if I can just add on to that a bit,
sure.
Which is that the value to senior attorneys, and some, I fully recognize that, the current year and yesteryear law firm, it's a big deal to have your last name, okay, as part of the firm name. That being said, when a senior attorney is joining a firm with a well-known brand firm, they bring such great value to that firm because the firm is attracting the cases And then the senior attorneys, at least what we're seeing a lot in personal injury law, the senior attorney that joins a well-branded regional trial attorney practice, they're able to leverage what we talked about before, their history and their reputation, especially with the defense bar, to be able to be getting higher value settlements in advance of when we finally get back into court. They're able to be working with clients to get into court on matters that they're really not generating themselves as time's going by.
Got it. Now, I know we haven't talked too much about Litify specifically. We try to do that by design on a lot of these Liticasts. We don't want it to turn into a Litify commercial. However, so there's the warning, there's the caveat. But I would love for your view on a system like ours, when you are doing that assessment and you are trying to figure out or assist a client in their succession planning. I know from a technical perspective, I can talk all day long about how, being on a very flexible, dynamic platform like Litify can help someone as they acquire or divest or go into a new practice or they grow. But from a pure succession perspective, how valuable is that to sort of understand inventory, all the things that Litify brings to the table? Is that something you look for?
Terry, it's huge. Okay. And there's reasons why it's huge that haven't even played themselves out yet. And it's things that, going back to my grandfather, banging my head against the wall, that I get a headache on, and maybe you guys are a solution. I'm sure you are. Okay. That is clients and referral sources. Okay. Going back to the trust and estates, I see all the time, I'm working with a client right now, 4,800 estate plans. Okay, is how many estate plans that they've written over the years. So when I approach a growing law firm and say, would you be interested to have a conversation with a lawyer that's thinking about retiring in the next 5 years, and they've written 4,800 estate plans? Well, it sounds great, right? But where are the clients today? Okay, where are the files? Who's going to contact the clients? How's all that going to be managed beyond just a Christmas card? Okay, that used to go. How do we actually unify the documents? Right, we've got those wills were written on this platform. The growing firm is on that platform. There is such opportunity for the growing firm to be able, and this goes back to what I was saying before about, okay, I used to just match and leave them at the altar. And I recognize that second day effect, and this is a big example of that, Terry, is you take this, especially in the trust and estates area, somebody will figure out that it's not all that expensive, okay, to actually get our hands on an updated list of clients and figure out how to tactically contact them. And now that we've all been thrust into, and I know we're on a different platform than Zoom today, but Zoom came into our lexicon real fast, and it's here to stay. And I have a client, she doesn't have 4,800, but she's got 600 clients as estate planning attorney. We were going to have breakfast, lunches, and dinners over the next 2 years, Terry. We're now going to be planning out 15-minute Zoom meetings to do that syllogism we talked about before, to introduce the new guys to the client. With my client, we can do that in all of 15 minutes, but there should really be much more on the back end of, okay, we had that conversation. We found out that Sally just got divorced from Bobby, and they had 2 kids, and those 2 kids are here and there and everywhere. And, so the next time when the new guy is going to contact that client, all that data is there. Huge opportunity.
Yeah. We have this conversation with every Litify client or prospect that's coming on, and they'll say, well, there's a fear of that transition, and there's a fear of sort of the resource that's going to be required to do it. And then, and I don't sugarcoat it. I say, listen, there's definitely house cleaning that has to occur as part of this, and be it consolidation of systems, being it pulling data from multiple areas, be it a real evaluation of your workflows now and what they look like. Our view is you rip the Band-Aid off and you do it kind of all at once to really get an understanding of in your scenario, it's succession, it's value, but in our scenario, it's very similar. It's if you were to get someone was going to come in and you wanted to sell tomorrow, what are you handing over to them in terms of all of this data, the CRM components you mentioned, which are really just reaching out to those clients and keeping some structure and order around that, documents, data history, the narrative around the cases. Where does this collaboration even exist? The notes, for us, and for Litify clients, we've even had it happen. we call them divorces, where firms split, or acquisitions, or firms go together. We've had both scenarios where how nice it is where you just basically do like 5 exports of reports and say, oh, you want to know what we're all about? Boom, here it is. Here's essentially everything that we got. Here's all the docs. Here's all the reports. Here's our inventory. Here's our next steps. Here's like, and that is incredibly powerful for a firm that is able to do that. And then particularly in a remote environment like we are now, where it's not physical boxes of documents or anything you're handing over, you're literally just emailing, a link to something and saying, check this out. So I think we see a lot of the same, in that scenario.
Yeah. And here, there's a lot of having to build that in, but it's an investment today to really reap the benefits of that tomorrow.
Yep. One thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up, a very curious thing is happening, I think, in law firms, or if it's not happening now, it's certainly starting to happen, and we see more of it, is along the lines of acquisitions. We've seen it in healthcare, we've seen it in finance, we've seen in manufacturing. You hear about the big law firms consolidating or acquiring one another. You get, the alerts from ALM or whatever talking about some enormous law firm, acquiring another one. Are we going to see more of that, you think, in the sort of the mid-market space, so to speak? Are we going to see the 50-person firm acquiring the 5-person firm? Are we going to see consolidation in that way?
Well, I'm betting the house on it, Terry. Yes, it's here. Growth by acquisition is here, and it's just very logical, and that's a real big reason why I created Senior Attorney Match. I mean, our motto is a win-win-win. Okay, so it's a win for the senior attorney to develop a succession plan for their practice. It's a win for a growing firm, because that's what we're promoting. Because growing firms are always looking for what? New clients and new referral sources. And so the senior attorney automatically brings that in growth by acquisition. And the third win is for the clients. Okay, the client that depended on their attorney, for years, sometimes even a full generation, and the clients benefit by the continuation that growth by acquisition presents. And I think that when more attorneys recognize that they don't have to just hang up their cleats and call their friends and acquaintances and say, hey, would you take this open file? Would you take that open file? And then send some kind of a letter, if they even do that, and say, hey, it's been a good run, but I'm going to retire as of December 31st. And they realize that they can join a growing law firm and benefit by those future retained billings. I mean, I've got a client, Terry, he was going to do just that. He was going to hang up his cleats, amazing attorney in a very affluent town in Massachusetts. He was the go-to zoning attorney, okay? And usually every city and town has one or more go-to zoning attorneys, and they can lead very lucrative practices. He was just going to hang up his cleats. And luckily his one of his colleagues knew me, contacted me, and turns out that actually a client of mine, they have a zoning practice, and they were more than happy to welcome him into the practice. Now he's retired, but he's getting checks in the mail because we entered into an earnout arrangement with him. So yes, I think that the growing firms, as they think about how do we get new clients, growth by acquisition with the right senior attorney is a great model. And senior attorneys that are thinking, wow, is there actually value to my practice? Joining a growing law firm, we continue to find is a great formula to get those 3 wins.
Yeah, interesting to also think about, some of the changes that are occurring in places like Utah, where now it's not even a lawyer owning these firms, where it could be combining of finance and accounting and estate planning and personal injury. Who knows? I mean, you could basically put all these elements under one roof. And what does that do from an M&A perspective? That's very interesting to think about where that could go. You're
right. It'll be a game changer. And, I'm not so sure that will happen on a national basis anytime all that soon. You never know. It's happening in other countries. We've got, it's always, whenever I talk to people and say that there's, rules of professional responsibility or professional conduct for lawyers, that's usually like a punchline for a joke, that we have professional conduct rules, but they're pretty sacred, and conflicts of interest are very sacred to a lot of attorneys. So yeah, it's fascinating. That's an interesting trend, and let's see where it goes, because again, that would be a huge game changer in the law.
Yeah, and what's interesting is last note on the conflict piece. We go into some very established, well-known firms, and they still struggle with conflict checking, and it's one of the first things that comes up from a systems perspective.
For sure.
Where they'll ask us, we have a pretty strong capability around that, just out of the box, and then customers will ask for some modifications, which we can do. Again, selling my Litify hat on right now, but yeah, that is a very, very pervasive problem for firms big and small. So I'd agree.
For sure. No, yeah, please go ahead, Terry.
Well, I was going to say, just in closing here, Jeremy, I know that you're talking about sort of some of the futuristic elements. Where do you see Senior Attorney Match going? Just maybe give us a little bit of 2.0, if you will, for the business.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, I do see myself in 1.0 for a while, because there are just so many boomer attorneys out there that have developed great practices, and they really deserve the value that they've developed over the course of their careers. On the 2.0 piece, those firms that are now often, what I find a typical growing firm is usually led by a 40-something or early 50-something. They've got 15, 20 years under their belt. Okay, they're good lawyers, good business people. Well, you know what? In 10 years from now, they're going to start thinking to themselves, what do we do with our practice? And now that we've branded our practice, okay, leverage those different areas of digital marketing. Have a real brand. They're not just coming to that law firm because Sal is the greatest TBI attorney in Manhattan. So I want to see, Sal, I'm going to such and such firm because we know that they're the best PI firm in Manhattan, and they must do TBI because they're branded so well. That kind of well-branded practice will be able to benefit by getting real money up front at a closing, which is often something that I'm not able to deliver on right now, because in 1.0, so much of it is based on the goodwill. Will the clients continue to show up? In 2.0, where there's real branding, where there's real data that a company like Litify can show consistently, this firm, okay, whether it's during recession, not during recession, whether it's in this practice area, that practice area, we monitor where the cases are coming in from. People aren't just asking for Sal, they're contacting this firm. That's where 2.0 is going to go, and that's where you're going to hear about 8-figure, you never know, 9-figure, for large enough law firms with the right revenues, that could really happen.
Got it. Excellent. Jeremy, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. This is the top. I could talk more on this. This is like I said, comes up quite a bit with clients, and I think that people, if they aren't thinking about it, they certainly should. I would say, I'm obviously going to plug you. You see, you know your stuff around this topic, and I think Jeremy Pook at Senior Attorney Match is a great resource to lean on when you're thinking about this topic. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate it. And I would ask our community out there, please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn. We're going to have a recording of this actual Liticast up on our website. So under litify.com/Liticast, we'll have a recording up. You can see it. You can pull things out. We are actually looking at right now doing a replacement, so to speak, of our user conference that we usually do in person every year with a series of Liticasts. So stay tuned for more information on that. Jeremy, again, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Real pleasure. Thank you, Terry. Thanks to Litify.
Great. Have a great week, everyone.